Fox News alert, a new showdown over President Trump's push to enforce existing immigration laws after massive ICE raids in Mississippi target several businesses in what's being called the largest single state immigration enforcement operation in U.S. history. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is the host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy herself, Fox Business Network anchor Dagan McDowell, former Ohio Senate Democrat Minority Leader Capri Cafaro, and joining us on the couch, Chris Wilson, Republican pollster and former pollster for the Ted Cruz 2016 campaign. And you are outnumbered. I am. And you're wearing very festive socks.
Very festive. These socks are
right, who
really
are the people
impressive.
On your socks there?
They're former presidents. It's,
okay.
They kind of live to be on my socks.
There's Mr. Military-industrial complex himself.
Okay. Meanwhile, authorities say nearly 700 illegal immigrants were taken into custody yesterday as hundreds of ICE agents swarmed 7 food processing plants in Mississippi. Workers who were found to have legal status were allowed to leave the plants after having their trucks searched. Some employees tried to escape on foot but were captured. ICE says it will consider potential humanitarian situations as well as any criminal histories and prior deportation orders when interviewing all of those who were arrested.
The United States of America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. And it's no wonder that people from around the world want to come here to our country. But while we do welcome folks from other countries, they have to follow our laws.
So, pardon me, this comes as Democrats are stepping up criticism over the president's policies and rhetoric on the border crisis. 2020 candidate Julian Castro blasting the raids, tweeting, "Trump uses dehumanizing terms like invasion to justify an agenda that separates families and targets communities like Morton, Mississippi. It is time to break up ICE." Castro joins other 2020 Democrats who have called to reorganize or reform ICE, including Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Cory Booker. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand supports abolishing ICE, and Beto O'Rourke says he is open to that idea as well. Chris, let's start with this raid. In a lot of ways, if you look at it, this is one of the most effective ways to discourage illegal immigration. And if you look at the nexus of crime that's going on here, first of all, everyone's heart goes out to the children that are sitting there crying about their parents being deported. I imagine that's horrible. Their parents are the ones that put them in this situation. And, you know, if you look at all the various crimes, whether it's the coyotes who are being paid $10,000 each or whatever to bring them over the border, the 31% who are sexually abused along the way, according to Amnesty International, the identities that are stolen in order for that employer to have fake social security numbers to put into the system. I mean, the crimes that go into this and the victims that fan out from there are enormous. If you discourage this and then you prosecute the business owner, which has to happen, and I assume will, because once they go through and see who is actually illegal, then they go in and they prosecute the employers, that this is the way to discourage it, yes?
It is, and first of all, you've got to enforce our laws. I mean, it's the laws that are on the books, and I think for Gillibrand and O'Rourke to call for abolishing the agency that exists to enforce these laws is nothing more than another call for open borders, which we know is what they support. I think one of the other statistics that you didn't cite that I think is most heartbreaking for me as a father is that just 4 years ago, from the number of single males crossing the border with a child has increased by some accounts by over 800%. These aren't single males that just all of a sudden start having kids to bring them across the border. They're not their kids. And it was pointed out in testimony in Congress a few weeks ago under questioning from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that if somebody in the United States commits a crime, if they're drunk driving, if they're abusing their spouse, and they have a child in the car, or they have a child in the home, it doesn't matter. They're still taken to jail, and they're separated from their child. If a crime is committed, yes, you're going to be separated from your child. That's bottom line. And if you are employing someone who is here illegally, that law has got to be enforced. And yes. I think that's the bottom line.
To that end, Dagan, so these are businesses that need employees, obviously. They're looking for workers. I made some phone calls. I looked at these different businesses. One of them claims that they were using E-Verify. I don't know if that's going to pan out to be true or not. But it really shows the point that the businesses are enabling this, and that stricter, if you penalized them, a lot of this would start. And then you need to reform the system because they obviously need the workers.
It sends a very clear message to the businesses, number one, that you must comply with the law, and each individual you must vet. And it puts the burden on the business, less so the government, number one. And it also, by doing it, President Trump was promising raids in June across the country, and then they didn't materialize, and then raids in mid-July, and they didn't materialize. This going into a place of work is much less traumatic for the family. If you go into the place of work, it's much more orderly if you're trying to identify and apprehend people who are in this country illegally. And by the way, to the businesses, I checked. This was in Mississippi. Mississippi has the second highest unemployment rate in this country. Yeah. It's 40. Exactly. The highest rate is Alaska of the 50 states. Mississippi's unemployment rate is 5%. The national unemployment rate is 3.7% by comparison. So it does seem to indicate that there are people in that state who would like jobs, who are in this country legally that they could go out and hire. And just one other thing I wanted to point out, something that never gets covered about the Trump administration. They dramatically increased the number of seasonal work visas for this summer, the H-2B visas. They increased it by 30,000. That was nearly doubling what the summer visa allotment usually is. So there are ways to employ people legally in this country. Yeah. And actually, this Trump administration is trying to help that.
I am so glad people are talking about the employer issue.
Definitely, but I just want to, before we run out of time, get to the idea of Democrats hitting back saying that we should dismantle ICE at this point.
I think the calls to dismantle ICE, frankly, are really lazy. I mean, we need to deal with immigration reform writ large. And I think that if we really want to take a serious step, what we need to do is find these employers who are basically circumventing the law because they don't want to pay withholding taxes. You want to make Social Security and Medicare more solvent. You find these individuals, these companies 10 times more than what they're not paying in FICA and FUTA, and see things change.
Yeah. Kennedy, what do you think about the calls from Democrats on the heels of this, that this is racism and everything else we read in the introduction?
I do think it's a horrible look considering the weekend and the week that we've had and the conversation that we're having right now. And rounding up and targeting people who are working doesn't exactly target the people that you're talking about who are doing the most harm in this country. Those people aren't trafficking kids. Those people aren't manufacturing and selling drugs. Those people are doing what they can to make their lives better, to help their families, and they are working. And that's what you're supposed to do. And our system is broken. Our system is chaotic. It is all over the place. We need congressional fixes, and we also do need more of the kind of visas that allow people to come in and seasonally work. Because when people are able to do that, and they know there is a mechanism for coming here, they tend to go back. That means they go back to their families. And yes, they are sending remittances. And I agree, people shouldn't be stealing each other's identities, but when they are offering Social Security numbers, they are paying taxes.
But Kennedy, you can't prosecute, because I absolutely hear what you're saying, that these are people who are here and are operating as citizens, but you can't prosecute the businesses unless you prove that the employees that are working for them are here illegally. So unless they went in and made the arrests, they can't go after the employer. And if you don't stop the employers, no, they can't.
Of course you can.
You can. I actually talked to law enforcement this morning. You can't. They have to process them and prove and say, this is how many illegal workers you had here, and this is how you didn't verify them. And that's like part of the investigation. It doesn't mean that in the end they have to actually deport them. They could do something else.
But they're talking about deporting people. And, there were a few people who had legal status. And, once they were detained, they were let go. I just think this is a bad week for this type of thing. It's stoking fear within immigrant communities. And also, I think it's throwing a bone to the base to distract from the fact that the president is going to compromise on gun control.
That's an interesting point.